Welcome to Historical Life Stories. Here, we don't just tell history, we uncover the hidden lives of ideas, from the struggles of great thinkers to the lessons that shaped entire generations. Every story reveals how humanity has grown through failure, resilience, and wisdom. In our series on 8 psychology lessons for life, we explore their biography as if they were living beings, born in ancient wisdom, tested through struggle, and leaving behind a legacy woven into everyday life. These timeless lessons aren't just knowledge, they're characters in the grand story of human history. If you love history told with meaning, psychology told with heart, and stories that connect the past to the present, you found your place. Subscribe and join us on this journey through the lives that shaped the way we think, feel, and live today. The birth of what we call the psychology lessons for life can be traced back to the early stirrings of human civilization, when people first began to wonder about the nature of their own thoughts, emotions, and actions. Long before psychology became a formal science in the 19th century, it existed in fragments within philosophy, religion, and spiritual traditions. The concept of knowing oneself, of seeking understanding beyond the immediate experience of life, was the soil in which these lessons took root. Ancient societies were not equipped with brain scans or empirical experiments, yet they carried a deep curiosity about why human beings behave the way they do. This curiosity was expressed in stories, dialogues, meditations, and oral traditions that laid the groundwork for what later generations would come to call psychology. In Greece, the figure of Socrates stands as one of the most influential guardians of these early ideas. His famous phrase, "Know thyself," was not just a philosophical slogan, but a profound invitation to turn inward, to question one's motives, beliefs, and desires. To Socrates, wisdom did not come from accumulating facts, but from the constant examination of life. His method of questioning others, often called the Socratic method, planted the idea that through dialogue and reflection, human beings could uncover hidden truths about themselves. These seeds of self-awareness would eventually become central to psychology, shaping lessons about introspection, identity, and growth. Socrates' disciple Plato expanded on these ideas by describing the human soul as having different parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. Though not scientific in the modern sense, Plato's model mirrored later psychological theories about the conscious, unconscious, and emotional aspects of the mind. Aristotle, too, contributed by observing human behavior systematically, especially in his writings about memory, motivation, and ethics. What they were doing unknowingly was giving psychology its first language of self-understanding. Meanwhile, in India, the spiritual traditions of Hinduism and Buddhism were cultivating another dimension of these lessons. The Upanishads, written as early as 800 BCE, explored the nature of the self, Atman, and its relationship to ultimate reality. They proposed that human suffering often arises from ignorance of one's true self, an idea that resonates with modern psychology's emphasis on self-awareness and authenticity. Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, introduced the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, which revolved around understanding the causes of suffering and cultivating mindfulness, compassion, and detachment. These practices were not just spiritual, they were deeply psychological, offering methods of meditation and awareness that today are recognized as powerful tools for managing anxiety, depression, and stress. The birth of psychology lessons in this context was both practical and profound. They were designed to transform the human mind from within. In China, Confucius and Laozi added their own voices to this unfolding story. Confucius emphasized harmony, moral cultivation, and self-discipline within relationships, and society. His teachings underscored the importance of behavior in social contexts, reminding us that individual psychology is never separate from the collective. Lazi, the founder of Taoism, encouraged living in accordance with the Tao, or the natural way of the universe. His lessons valued simplicity, patience, and flowing with life, rather than forcing outcomes. These teachings foreshadowed later psychological insights about acceptance, stress reduction, and the dangers of rigid control. They demonstrated that early psychology was not confined to personal introspection alone, but extended to how one interacts with family, community, and the larger world. Across cultures, ancient wisdom carried strikingly similar insights. Human beings were urged to understand themselves, regulate their desires, and seek balance in life. Though the words differed, the heart of the message was the same. What makes this period fascinating is that without modern scientific tools, people intuited truths about the human mind that later research would confirm. For example, mindfulness practices from Buddhism align closely with modern cognitive behavioral techniques. The Stoics of Greece and Rome, such as Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus, taught that we cannot control external events, but only our reactions to them, a principle echoed in therapy today. These parallels show that the birth of psychology lessons was not an accident of time or place, but a universal human need, expressed in different voices across continents. The challenges of early life for these lessons lay in their fragmentation. Each culture held pieces of the puzzle, but they were not connected into a coherent whole. A Greek philosopher might never know of Buddhist meditation, and a Confucian scholar might never read Plato. Yet, even in isolation, these traditions converged on similar truths, that self-knowledge, awareness, and balance are central to living well. Their survival across centuries is a testament to their power. Oral traditions passed them down, sacred texts preserved them, and teachers embodied them in practice. People returned to these ideas, generation after generation, refining and adapting them to new contexts. As these lessons grew, they did more than shape individuals. They also influenced the course of societies. A ruler influenced by Confucian ethics might govern with fairness and stability. A person practicing Buddhist mindfulness might cultivate peace that spread to their community. A student of Socrates might carry forward the habit of questioning authority and seeking truth, laying the foundations of democracy. Thus, the birth of psychology lessons was not just a personal affair, but a cultural event, shaping both inner lives and social structures. Looking back, it is remarkable how early human beings sensed that the key to life was not external wealth or conquest, but the inner state of the mind. In caves, temples, marketplaces, and courts, people wrestled with the same questions we ask today. Who am I? Why do I suffer? How can I live well? Out of these questions was born the first stage of the psychology lessons for life, a beginning marked by curiosity, wisdom, and the courage to look inward. Though centuries have passed, the echoes of that birth remain with us. Every time someone meditates, journals, questions their own thoughts, or chooses harmony over conflict, they are living out the ancient origins of these lessons, proving that their birth was not in one moment or place, but in the very heart of humanity itself. When the early fragments of wisdom that would become psychology entered the Enlightenment era, they faced a tumultuous adolescence, struggling to define themselves and to gain recognition in a world increasingly devoted to reason, science, and proof. The Enlightenment was a period when philosophers, scientists, and thinkers questioned tradition, sought rational explanations for the natural world, and demanded evidence instead of faith. Within this environment, The lessons of psychology were forced to move away from mystical speculation and philosophical musings towards something more systematic. Yet adolescence is always a time of confusion and identity crisis, and for psychology, this meant it often wavered between being dismissed as philosophy and striving to be recognized as a true science. The world was not yet ready to embrace it fully, and so its teenage years were marked by growing pains, conflicts, and dramatic shifts in self-understanding. The formal adolescence of psychology began in the late 19th century, when Wilhelm Wundt established the first laboratory dedicated to the study of the human mind in Leipzig, Germany. For the first time, psychology attempted to behave like a disciplined child of science, using controlled experiments to measure reaction times, sensations, and perceptions. Wundt believed that, by breaking down consciousness into its smallest parts, much like chemists analyzed elements, the secrets of the mind could be revealed. It was a bold step, and yet, much like a teenager trying to fit in, psychology often overcompensated. It wanted so desperately to be accepted among the natural sciences that it confined itself to narrow, measurable aspects of experience, leaving aside the broader, more complex mysteries of human thought and emotion. At the same time, William James in the United States was giving psychology a more practical, fluid, and distinctly American personality. His monumental work, The Principles of Psychology, 1890, treated the mind not as something that could be broken into pieces, but as a dynamic stream of consciousness. He emphasized habits, willpower, and the practical application of psychological insights to daily life. James represented the side of psychology that resisted being boxed into rigid scientific formulas and instead embraced its role as a guide to human experience. These contrasting approaches, Wundt's rigid scientific structure and James's flexible, experience-oriented philosophy, mirrored the identity struggle of an adolescent, unsure whether to conform or rebel. Freud arrived in this same period, and his influence was both electrifying and scandalous. Like a rebellious teenager storming into the world with radical new ideas, Freud spoke openly about the unconscious mind, sexuality, repression, and the hidden conflicts that shape behavior. His theories unsettled the polite world of European intellectuals, many of whom dismissed him as eccentric or even dangerous. Yet his insistence that hidden forces drive human behavior could not be ignored. Psychoanalysis, with its dream interpretations and exploration of childhood experiences, offered psychology a new personality, dramatic, passionate, and unafraid of taboo. Adolescence is often a time of experimenting with identity, and through Freud, psychology experimented with being bold, controversial, and unapologetically human. Not all welcomed this rebellious streak. Behaviorism soon emerged, led by figures like John B. Watson and later B.F. Skinner, who rejected Freud's speculations about the unconscious and insisted that psychology must be about observable behavior. To them, talk of thoughts and feelings was unscientific, as it could not be measured. They argued that people, much like animals, learn through conditioning, reinforcement, and punishment. This phase of psychology's adolescence was one of discipline and external control, like a strict parent trying to correct a child gone astray. The behaviorists gave psychology structure and credibility in the eyes of the scientific community, but at the same time they reduced it to a mechanical process, stripping away the richness of inner life. Psychology, in its teenage turmoil, swung between extremes, between the passionate exploration of hidden inner worlds and the rigid insistence on external measurable behavior. This period was also marked by tension between Europe and America. In Europe, psychoanalysis dominated, while in America, behaviorism reigned. Psychology seemed to have split personalities, each culture nurturing different versions of the same growing discipline. It reflected the broader adolescent theme of searching for identity, trying on different masks, and rebelling against authority. The very fact that psychology was being fought over by different schools of thought demonstrated its vitality, even if it also revealed its immaturity. Despite the conflicts, this adolescence was a time of great growth. Important questions were being asked. Should psychology focus on the individual or on universal laws of behavior? Should it study the conscious mind, the unconscious mind, or just behavior itself? Should it align itself strictly with natural sciences, or remain closer to philosophy and the humanities? These questions shaped the character of the field for decades to come. Like a teenager discovering strengths and flaws through trial and error, psychology tested its boundaries, sometimes stumbling, but always moving forward. There were also important societal challenges during this adolescent stage. The world wars brought about mass trauma, and psychology was called upon to understand shell shock, now known as post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychologists were asked to apply their knowledge to real-world problems: how to rehabilitate soldiers, how to design training programs, and how to help individuals cope with unimaginable loss. This forced psychology to mature more quickly, much like a young person suddenly faced with adult responsibilities. It could no longer remain an abstract debate in academic circles. It had to prove itself useful in the real world. Another defining feature of this adolescence was its hunger for recognition. Psychology wanted legitimacy in universities, in medical practice, and in government. It sought to differentiate itself from philosophy while also borrowing heavily from it. It wanted to be scientific, but not so cold that it lost touch with human experience. And this tension lay its deepest struggle. And yet, from this struggle came creativity. New branches emerged: clinical psychology, educational psychology, social psychology, each representing a different attempt to answer the question of what psychology should be. By the mid-20th century, psychology was still maturing, but its adolescence had given it resilience and depth. Like any teenager who experiments, rebels, and faces rejection, psychology emerged stronger. Because of its conflicts, it had learned that being too rigid or too speculative could be dangerous, and it began to search for balance. This search would lead to the rise of humanistic psychology and later cognitive psychology, each building on the trials of adolescence. The adolescence of psychology, with its struggles for legitimacy, its battles between Freud and Skinner, its oscillations between inner life and outer behavior, was a necessary stage in its growth. It was awkward, controversial, and often misunderstood, but it laid the groundwork for the confident adulthood that followed. The lessons born during this time about the importance of evidence, the power of the unconscious, the significance of behavior, and the need for real-world application remain embedded in psychology's identity even today. Like a teenager who eventually finds themselves, psychology had to go through this stormy period of growth before it could step into its full maturity. The idea of self-awareness as one of the central lessons of psychology is both timeless and universal, yet its development reflects centuries of thought, experimentation, and practice. To know oneself is more than a philosophical curiosity. It is the foundation of psychological growth, emotional regulation, and the capacity to live a meaningful life. Self-awareness can be understood as the ability to observe one's thoughts, emotions, and behaviors without becoming entirely consumed by them. It is the recognition that our inner world influences our outer world, and that by understanding ourselves, we can take greater responsibility for our choices and ultimately our destiny. Throughout history, from ancient wisdom traditions to modern psychological research, self-awareness has been upheld as the starting point of transformation. Without it, change is almost impossible. With it, even the most difficult challenges become manageable. Ancient philosophy often emphasized the importance of looking inward. Socrates' declaration, "The unexamined life is not worth living," still resonates as perhaps the clearest expression of the value of self-awareness. His method of relentless questioning encouraged individuals to uncover their assumptions and biases, revealing that ignorance of oneself is the greatest obstacle to wisdom. In Buddhist practice, self-awareness was cultivated through mindfulness meditation, where practitioners observed their breath, sensations, and thoughts as they arose. The purpose was not to judge or suppress them, but to see them clearly, creating a distance between observer and experience. This clarity of awareness was considered essential to liberation from suffering. In these traditions, the message was the same. To live authentically, one must first see oneself honestly. Modern psychology took this timeless insight and began to investigate it scientifically. Self-awareness was described in terms of consciousness, identity, and metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. William James referred to the self as both the I, the observing subject, and the me, the object of observation. This duality reflected the paradox of human nature. We are both participants in life and witnesses to our participation. In the 20th century, Carl Rogers, one of the leading humanistic psychologists, emphasized the importance of self-concept. He believed that much of human distress arises from the gap between our real self and our ideal self, and that personal growth comes from aligning the two. Rogers argued that self-awareness, nurtured in an environment of unconditional positive regard, allows individuals to move toward greater authenticity and self-acceptance. One of the most powerful aspects of self-awareness is its role in emotional regulation. Emotions, when unexamined, often control us. Anger, fear, jealousy, or sadness can dominate behavior if they remain unconscious. However, when one becomes aware of these emotions as they arise, a shift occurs. Instead of being swept away, the individual gains perspective. Psychologist Daniel Goleman popularized this idea in his work on emotional intelligence, arguing that self-awareness is the cornerstone of all other emotional and social skills. According to Goleman, the ability to recognize one's emotional states creates space for better decision-making, empathy, and resilience. Without self-awareness, individuals are at the mercy of impulses. With it, they are empowered to respond thoughtfully, rather than react instinctively. A simple but profound example of this can be seen in the practice of journaling. When people write down their thoughts and feelings, they often discover patterns that were invisible in daily life. Someone may notice that their stress always peaks after certain types of interactions, or that their mood improves dramatically after physical exercise. This act of observing oneself through writing strengthens self-awareness, turning vague feelings into concrete insights. Similarly, in therapy, clients are guided to pay attention to their inner experiences, connecting past events to present reactions. Over time, this process allows them to see connections they had missed, and once seen, these patterns lose some of their power. Self-awareness also has a social dimension. People who lack it often struggle in relationships, unable to see how their actions affect others. A person may think they are being assertive, while others experience them as aggressive. They may believe they are listening when in fact, they are waiting impatiently for their turn to speak. Developing self-awareness in this context means recognizing not only one's internal states, but also how those states are expressed and perceived by others. This is why feedback from trusted friends, mentors, or colleagues is so valuable. Often, others see aspects of us that we are blind to. True self-awareness involves being open to this feedback, even when it is uncomfortable. The development of self-awareness is not without challenges. It requires courage, as looking inward often reveals flaws, fears, and contradictions. Many avoid self-examination because it threatens their self-image, yet psychology teaches that growth is only possible when one faces reality honestly. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, those parts of ourselves we deny or repress. He argued that integrating the shadow, acknowledging and accepting our hidden aspects, is essential to wholeness. Without this, we project our unrecognized flaws onto others, blaming them for what we cannot see in ourselves. By bringing the shadow into awareness, we reduce its unconscious control and become more integrated human beings. In practical terms, cultivating self-awareness is a lifelong process. Meditation, reflective writing, therapy, and honest dialogue are among the most effective tools. Each method creates a mirror, allowing us to observe ourselves with greater clarity. Neuroscience has even begun to explore the brain mechanisms behind self-awareness, finding that regions like the prefrontal cortex are active when we reflect on ourselves. These findings confirm what wisdom traditions have always known. Awareness is not a vague mystical idea, but a real trainable capacity of the mind. The impact of self-awareness on society is profound. Leaders who lack it often create environments of fear, misunderstanding, and conflict, while self-aware leaders inspire trust, empathy, and cooperation. In education, students who develop self-awareness are better able to regulate stress and persist in the face of challenges. In families, parents who understand their own emotions are less likely to pass unresolved conflicts onto their children. In every sphere of life, self-awareness multiplies its benefits outward, shaping not only the individual, but the community as well. Ultimately, the lesson of self-awareness is that knowledge of the self is the foundation upon which all other growth rests. Without it, people are like ships tossed by waves, unaware of what drives them. With it, they gain a compass, the ability to navigate life with intention and responsibility. Though it is never complete, the pursuit of self-awareness is itself transformative, turning confusion into clarity and reaction into response. It is the first step in any journey of change, the beginning of wisdom, and one of the most enduring contributions of psychology to the human story. The lesson that thoughts shape emotions, and that by altering the way we think, we can influence the way we feel, stands as one of the most significant achievements of modern psychology. Often referred to in clinical contexts as mind over mood, this principle has become a cornerstone of therapeutic practice and a guiding insight for people seeking greater resilience and emotional stability in daily life. At its core, the idea is that our minds do not merely reflect reality, but actively interpret it. These interpretations, sometimes accurate and often distorted, directly impact how we feel and behave. If we can learn to recognize and adjust these thought patterns, we open the possibility of transforming not only our mood, but also our relationships, choices, and long-term well-being. The development of this lesson can be traced back to cognitive psychology, particularly the groundbreaking work of Aaron Beck in the 1960s. Beck, a psychiatrist working with depressed patients, noticed that their emotional states were consistently tied to patterns of negative thinking. He observed that these individuals interpreted neutral or even positive events in ways that reinforced hopelessness and despair. A minor mistake was seen as proof of total incompetence. A brief rejection was magnified into evidence of lifelong unlovability, and a passing worry was inflated into catastrophic expectation. Beck concluded that it was not the events themselves that produced distress, but the interpretations attached to them. From this insight emerged cognitive therapy, later expanded into cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, which emphasize identifying distorted thoughts, challenging them, and replacing them with more balanced and realistic alternatives. The elegance of this approach lies in its practicality. Instead of attempting to erase or suppress emotions, which often backfires, cognitive therapy teaches individuals to examine the link between their thoughts and feelings. For example, imagine two students who both receive a poor grade on an exam. One thinks, "I'm a complete failure, I'll never succeed," and feels crushed by despair. The other thinks, "This test was difficult, but I can improve if I study differently next time," and feels motivated to try again. The objective event, the poor grade, is the same, but the emotional outcome is profoundly different because of the way each student interprets it. This demonstrates the power of cognition to shape mood, and it shows why changing thoughts can be such a powerful tool in managing emotions. The lesson of mind over mood extends far beyond clinical therapy and enters the realm of everyday life. Many people find themselves trapped in cycles of worry, anger, or sadness without realizing that their own interpretations are fueling these states. A driver cutting in front of us on the road might trigger instant rage if we think they're disrespecting me, but if we think maybe they're rushing to an emergency, the anger diminishes. The situation remains unchanged, but the chosen interpretation transforms the emotional response. This ability to pause, question our automatic thoughts, and select a healthier perspective is a skill that can be cultivated, and it becomes a source of freedom from habitual emotional suffering. Another dimension of this lesson involves the recognition of cognitive distortions. These are systematic patterns of thinking that consistently lead to inaccurate conclusions and negative emotions. Examples include black and white thinking, where situations are seen as all good or all bad, catastrophizing, where the worst possible outcome is assumed, and personalization, where one takes excessive responsibility for events beyond one's control. Beck and other cognitive psychologists cataloged these distortions and taught individuals how to spot them. The act of labeling a thought as a distortion often weakens its power, creating a gap between the thought and the emotion it produces. This gap is where choice becomes possible, and it is within this choice that transformation begins. The practical techniques of cognitive therapy reflect this principle. Thought records, for instance, ask individuals to write down distressing thoughts, identify the emotions associated with them, and then generate alternative, more balanced interpretations. Over time, this practice builds a habit of examining thoughts instead of automatically believing them. Another widely used technique is cognitive restructuring, which involves deliberately challenging the evidence for and against a belief. A person who thinks, "Nobody likes me," may be encouraged to list actual evidence for this claim, and then evidence against it, often discovering that their negative belief is exaggerated. These methods demonstrate that our thoughts are not fixed truths, but hypotheses that can be tested, revised, and improved. Mind over mood also finds resonance in ancient traditions. The Stoic philosophers of Greece and Rome, such as Epictetus, emphasized that it is not events themselves, but our judgments about them that disturb us. Similarly, Buddhist teachings highlight the importance of mindfulness in observing thoughts without attachment, thereby reducing their grip on emotions. Modern psychology, in validating these insights with empirical research, bridges ancient wisdom and contemporary science. It shows that while emotions are powerful, they are not invincible forces. They are shaped by the lens of thought, which can be adjusted with practice. The impact of this lesson on society has been profound. Cognitive behavioral therapy is now one of the most widely practiced and scientifically validated forms of psychotherapy, used to treat depression, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress, eating disorders, and more. Beyond therapy, Schools incorporate cognitive strategies to help students manage test anxiety. Workplaces teach cognitive tools to reduce stress and improve communication, and self-help literature draws heavily on the principles of thought and mood regulation. Millions of people worldwide have benefited from learning that they are not helpless in the face of their emotions, but can actively shape them through mindful awareness and deliberate cognitive change. Yet, it is important to acknowledge that this lesson does not imply that emotions can be eliminated or that thinking alone can cure all suffering. Emotions are natural and often carry valuable information. Sadness can indicate the need for rest or reflection. Anger can signal injustice, and fear can warn of danger. The purpose of mind over mood is not to silence these signals, but to ensure they are proportionate and accurate, rather than distorted and overwhelming. It teaches balance, not suppression. By refining the way we interpret experiences, we can respond to emotions more wisely, using them as guides rather than masters. In personal terms, adopting this lesson can feel like learning a new language. At first, noticing and challenging automatic thoughts feels awkward, even artificial, but with practice, it becomes second nature. Over time, people discover that their mood no longer swings wildly in response to every setback, that they recover more quickly from disappointment, and that they experience greater inner stability. The shift may be subtle, but its impact on the quality of life is profound. Ultimately, the lesson of mind over mood embodies one of psychology's greatest gifts, the realization that we are not passive victims of our emotions, but active participants in shaping them. Life will always present difficulties, but the way we interpret those difficulties determines whether we crumble, endure, or grow. By cultivating awareness of our thoughts and choosing interpretations that serve rather than sabotage us, we unlock a deeper resilience. This is not about denying reality, but about facing it with clarity and strength, guided by the recognition that within our minds lies the power to shape our emotional world. The recognition that human connection is central to well-being represents one of the most profound psychological lessons, a truth that transcends time, culture, and circumstance. From birth until death, our lives are defined by relationships. The infant's first cry is answered by a caregiver, and this early bond lays the foundation for how we understand safety, love, and trust. The lesson that connection matters is not simply a philosophical reflection, but a scientifically validated fact. Human beings are social creatures, wired to seek attachment and belonging, and deprived of these, we suffer deeply. Psychology has revealed again and again that isolation and disconnection are among the greatest threats to mental and physical health, while love, trust, and supportive relationships are the greatest sources of resilience and joy. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, gave one of the clearest frameworks for understanding this lesson. Bowlby observed that infants are biologically programmed to form attachments with caregivers, a survival mechanism as crucial as food or shelter. Secure attachment, where a caregiver is consistently responsive and nurturing, fosters confidence, emotional regulation, and the ability to explore the world. Insecure attachment, whether through neglect, inconsistency, or trauma, leaves deep imprints that can manifest as anxiety, avoidance, or difficulty in forming close bonds later in life. Ainsworth's strange situation experiments demonstrated how even toddlers reveal the profound psychological effects of connection, or its absence. These findings showed that relationships are not optional extras, but essential structures of the human psyche. Beyond childhood, the importance of connection continues. Research into social support consistently shows that people with strong networks of friends and family are more resilient in the face of stress, recover more quickly from illness, and even live longer. Conversely, loneliness is linked to increased risk of depression, heart disease, cognitive decline, and early death. In fact, studies have suggested that chronic loneliness may be as damaging to health as smoking or obesity. These findings highlight the extraordinary power of connection, not only for emotional stability, but for survival itself. The human nervous system evolved to thrive in communities, and when deprived of this environment, it falters. The mechanisms of connection operate on both biological and psychological levels. Oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, is released during moments of bonding such as hugging, breastfeeding, or even meaningful conversation. This hormone reduces stress, lowers blood pressure, and fosters trust. Neuroscience has revealed that our brains are designed to mirror others. Mirror neurons activate when we observe someone else's actions or emotions, enabling empathy and shared understanding. These biological processes confirm what humans have intuited for centuries, that being together, sharing, and supporting each other is a fundamental part of who we are. Connection is not limited to intimate relationships, but extends to all levels of human interaction. Friendships provide laughter, companionship, and mutual growth. Romantic relationships offer deep intimacy and partnership. Families, in their many forms, provide continuity and identity. Communities, whether based on geography, religion, or shared interests, create a sense of belonging and collective purpose. Even fleeting interactions, like a kind exchange with a stranger, can lift mood and remind us that we are part of something larger. Each of these connections nourishes the mind and body in different ways, weaving together the fabric of a meaningful life. Yet the lesson that connection matters is also revealed most starkly when it is absent. Solitary confinement, often used in prisons, has been shown to cause severe psychological distress, including anxiety, hallucinations, and depression. Children raised in orphanages without consistent caregivers often exhibit developmental delays and emotional difficulties, even when their physical needs are met. Older adults who experience loneliness are at significantly higher risk for dementia. These painful examples underscore that human beings are not meant to exist in isolation. Our psychological health deteriorates without bonds of trust and care. One of the most interesting aspects of this lesson is how it shapes resilience. People who endure hardship often draw strength, not from solitary grit, but from their connections to others. Survivors of trauma frequently cite relationships with family, friends, or even pets as the reason they were able to persevere. Viktor Frankl, reflecting on his time in Nazi concentration camps, observed that those who found meaning often did so by holding on to the memory of loved ones or by dreaming of future reunions. This illustrates that connection provides not only comfort, but also purpose, anchoring us in something greater than ourselves. Modern psychology has applied this lesson in therapy interventions. Group therapy harnesses the power of shared experience, reducing shame and isolation. Family therapy emphasizes the interdependence of individuals within a system, showing that healing often requires mending relationships. Couples therapy teaches partners how to communicate and reconnect, recognizing that emotional bonds are the foundation of healthy intimacy. Even individual therapy is, at its heart, a relationship between client and therapist, one where trust and empathy create a safe space for transformation. In each case, the healing comes not only from techniques, but from connection itself. Technology has added new complexity to this lesson. On one hand, social media and digital communication have expanded opportunities for connection across distances. People can maintain relationships with loved ones in different countries, find communities of shared interests, and access support groups that would otherwise be unavailable. On the other hand, these same tools can create superficial interactions that lack depth, leaving individuals feeling more isolated despite constant contact. The rise of loneliness in modern societies, even as people are more digitally connected than ever, reflects the difference between quantity and quality of connection. True psychological nourishment comes from authentic presence, empathy, and vulnerability, not from likes or brief exchanges. Cultural differences also shape how connection is experienced. In collectivist societies, relationships and community responsibilities are deeply ingrained, often providing strong support networks, but sometimes limiting individuality. In individualist societies, people may prize independence, yet struggle with isolation when communal ties are weak. Psychology has shown that regardless of cultural differences, the need for connection is universal. Though its expression varies, the lesson holds everywhere, whether through genuine loyalty, friendship, or shared rituals. Human beings thrive when they feel seen, valued, and connected. In personal terms, the importance of connection can be experienced in countless ways. A child running to hug a parent after a long day, a couple supporting each other through illness, a group of friends laughing together late into the night. All these moments illustrate the deep nourishment that bonds provide. Even small acts, like listening with genuine attention or offering encouragement, can ripple outward, strengthening the invisible threads that tie people together. In these moments, life feels richer and more grounded, reminding us that our existence is not solitary, but shared. Ultimately, the psychological lesson that connection matters is not simply about comfort or survival. It is about identity and meaning. We come to know ourselves through our relationships. Our reflections in the eyes of others help us build our sense of self. Our contributions to the lives of loved ones give us purpose. Our shared joys and struggles remind us that we are part of a larger story. To neglect connection is to neglect a fundamental aspect of being human. To cultivate it is to align with the deepest truth of our nature, that we are, at heart, creatures of relationship, and it is in connection that we find the fullest expression of life. The lesson of mindfulness and presence carries with it both ancient wisdom and modern scientific validation, making it one of the most transformative psychological insights for contemporary life. At its essence, mindfulness is the practice of intentionally paying attention to the present moment with openness, curiosity, and non-judgment. Presence is the ability to inhabit that moment fully, rather than being caught in regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. Human beings, unlike other animals, possess the capacity for complex thought, imagination, and memory. This gift has allowed us to build civilizations and imagine possibilities far beyond the immediate. Yet it also has a cost: the tendency to be trapped in rumination, worry, and distraction, pulled away from the richness of the now. The psychological lesson here is that peace and clarity are often found not in changing external circumstances, but in learning to rest in awareness of the present. The roots of mindfulness can be traced back to Eastern traditions, particularly Buddhism. Over 2,500 years ago, the Buddha taught that suffering arises from craving, attachment, and the mind's tendency to wander. He offered mindfulness as a path toward liberation, instructing practitioners to observe the breath, bodily sensations, thoughts, and emotions as they arise, without clinging or aversion. This simple but profound practice has endured for millennia because it directly addresses the human condition. In meditation, one discovers that thoughts and feelings are transient, passing like clouds in the sky. By observing them without judgment, one learns that identification with them is optional. This realization loosens the grip of fear, anger, and sorrow, revealing an inner space of calm that exists regardless of external events. Modern psychology began to embrace these insights in the latter half of the 20th century. John Kabat-Zinn was a pioneer in introducing mindfulness into clinical settings, developing the Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction (MBSR) program at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center in the late 1970s. His approach was deliberately secular, making mindfulness accessible to people from all backgrounds. Research soon demonstrated that mindfulness practices could reduce stress, alleviate chronic pain, and improve quality of life. Over time, mindfulness-based interventions expanded to include treatments for depression, anxiety, addiction, and trauma. These findings showed that ancient practices had measurable benefits in modern clinical contexts, validating what spiritual teachers had long known. The psychological mechanisms underlying mindfulness highlight why it is so powerful. One major effect is the reduction of rumination. Many psychological difficulties are fueled by repetitive negative thinking, replaying past mistakes, worrying about future outcomes, or dwelling on unresolved conflicts. Mindfulness interrupts this cycle by redirecting attention to the present. Instead of spiraling into what-if scenarios, the individual learns to return to the simple reality of breathing, sitting, or walking. Another effect is increased emotional regulation. When emotions are observed as they arise, they lose some of their intensity. Anger, for example, when noticed in its early physical signs, tightness in the chest, heat in the face, can be acknowledged before it escalates into destructive words or actions. The ability to witness emotions rather than be swept away by them fosters resilience and inner balance. Presence, closely tied to mindfulness, involves not only awareness, but engagement. It means being fully with the people and activities in front of us, rather than distracted by phones, intrusive thoughts, or endless multitasking. Relationships thrive when one is truly present. A child senses when a parent is only half listening, and a partner feels the difference between genuine attention and distracted nods. Presence communicates value and love in ways words cannot. It deepens intimacy, builds trust, and strengthens bonds. On a personal level, presence allows experiences to be richer. A meal eaten with awareness becomes more flavorful, a walk outdoors more vivid, a conversation more meaningful. Presence transforms ordinary moments into sources of joy. One of the challenges of cultivating mindfulness and presence is the modern environment itself. Technology, while offering convenience and connection, also fragments attention. Notifications, endless scrolling, and constant demands for productivity train the mind to be scattered, restless, and perpetually elsewhere. Many people live in a state of partial attention, always anticipating the next task or the next message. The result is a pervasive sense of dissatisfaction and stress. Mindfulness offers an antidote by retraining attention, helping individuals reclaim control over their focus. Even brief practices, such as pausing to take 3 conscious breaths, can disrupt the autopilot of distraction and restore awareness to the present. Another important dimension of mindfulness is the cultivation of compassion. Awareness of the present moment often brings awareness of one's own suffering and the suffering of others. This awareness, when held without judgment, naturally gives rise to empathy and kindness. Practices such as loving kindness meditation, where one deliberately generates goodwill toward oneself and others, demonstrate how mindfulness and compassion are inseparable. Psychologists and neuroscientists have shown that such practices increase feelings of social connection, and even alter brain structures related to empathy. The lesson is clear. Presence is not a detached or cold awareness, but a warm and engaged way of being. The benefits of mindfulness extend beyond individual well-being to collective contexts. In schools, mindfulness programs have helped students reduce anxiety, improve concentration, and enhance emotional intelligence. In workplaces, mindfulness training has been linked to reduced burnout, better teamwork, and increased creativity. In healthcare, it has supported patients in coping with pain and illness, and practitioners in maintaining resilience amidst demanding conditions. On a societal level, mindfulness has been suggested as a means of fostering greater understanding and reducing conflict, since awareness and compassion counteract the reactive cycles of anger and division. Still, mindfulness is not without its criticisms and limitations. Some argue that in its Western adaptation, it has been commercialized, stripped of its ethical and spiritual dimensions, and marketed as a quick fix for stress. Others caution that for individuals with severe trauma, mindfulness practices can initially intensify distressing memories. These concerns remind us that mindfulness is a powerful tool, but not a panacea. It requires skillful teaching, patience, and integration into broader contexts of support and meaning. When practiced with depth and integrity, however, it remains one of the most effective ways of cultivating psychological health. On a personal level, the practice of mindfulness often reveals unexpected insights. By sitting quietly and observing the flow of thoughts, one begins to see how much of life is spent in mental noise, rather than genuine experience. By returning again and again to the present, one learns that peace is not found by controlling external circumstances, but by changing one's relationship to them. Presence teaches that even in difficult moments, there is always something stable to rest upon: the breath, the body, the simple fact of being alive. This realization can bring profound relief, reminding us that beneath the turbulence of life, there is a ground of awareness that is always available. The enduring lesson of mindfulness and presence is that life is happening now, not in remembered pasts or imagined futures. To inhabit the present with awareness and compassion is to reclaim the fullness of existence. It is to discover that joy is not hidden in distant achievements, but available in ordinary moments when experienced deeply. In learning to be present, we not only heal ourselves, but also bring greater presence to others, enriching relationships and communities. In a world of constant distraction and noise, the capacity to return to the moment becomes not just a personal skill, but a radical act of sanity and love. The understanding that failure is not an end, but a stepping stone toward growth, is one of the most empowering psychological lessons of life. For much of human history, failure carried the weight of shame and finality. In many cultures, mistakes were seen as evidence of weakness, incompetence, or even moral failing. Yet modern psychology has transformed the narrative, demonstrating that failure, when approached with the right mindset, is not only inevitable, but essential for progress, resilience, and mastery. This transformation is most clearly illustrated through the concept of the growth mindset, popularized by psychologist Carol Dweck, which distinguishes between viewing abilities as fixed and viewing them as capable of development. At its heart, this lesson teaches that every setback contains the seeds of future achievement, provided one learns, adapts, and perseveres. Children, by their very nature, embody this lesson in their earliest years, often without realizing it. A toddler learning to walk falls countless times, yet rarely interprets these stumbles as evidence of permanent inability. Instead, the child tries again and again, adjusting balance, experimenting with movement, until finally walking with confidence. The same is true for language learning, where mistakes in pronunciation and grammar are natural and expected. These early examples show that humans are born with an instinctive capacity to treat failure as practice. It is only later, often shaped by education systems or societal pressures, that failure begins to be framed as something to avoid, punish, or hide. Psychology challenges this cultural shift, urging a return to that childlike embrace of trial, error, and persistence. Terrell Dweck's work provides a framework for understanding how individuals interpret failure. A fixed mindset assumes that intelligence, talent, or ability are static traits, and failure is a reflection of inherent inadequacy. This mindset often leads to avoidance of challenges, fear of risk, and a tendency to give up when confronted with obstacles. In contrast, a growth mindset views abilities as malleable, shaped by effort, learning, and perseverance. From this perspective, failure is not a verdict, but feedback, a source of information about what needs to be improved. Studies have shown that students with a growth mindset not only perform better academically, but also display greater resilience, creativity, and willingness to embrace challenges. The lesson here is profound. The meaning of failure is not in the event itself, but in the interpretation one assigns to it. Real-life examples underscore this truth. Thomas Edison famously remarked, when asked about his thousands of failed attempts to invent the light bulb, that he had not failed, but found 10,000 ways that won't work. This reframing of failure as part of the process highlights the role of persistence in innovation. Similarly, J.K. Rowling, before achieving worldwide success with the Harry Potter series, faced multiple rejections from publishers. Each rejection could have been the final word on her dream, but she chose to persevere, refining her work and believing in its worth. Such stories remind us that failure is often not the opposite of success, but a prerequisite for it. Many of the world's greatest achievements are built on the foundations of countless mistakes and setbacks. The psychological benefits of embracing failure extend beyond achievement into personal growth and resilience. Failure often teaches humility, patience, and empathy. It strips away illusions of perfection and reminds us of our shared humanity, since everyone, regardless of talent or status, encounters setbacks. In relationships, acknowledging failure, whether in communication, understanding, or care, can open the door to deeper connection and repair. In personal endeavors, failure builds resilience, strengthening the capacity to endure challenges and adapt to changing circumstances. Research in resilience psychology shows that people who experience and recover from failures often develop greater mental toughness and a more nuanced appreciation of life's complexities. One of the most transformative aspects of this lesson lies in how failure reshapes identity. When individuals view themselves as separate from their failures, they develop self-compassion. Instead of saying, "I am a failure," they learn to say, "I experienced failure." This subtle shift preserves self-worth while still acknowledging mistakes. Self-compassion, as psychologist Kristin Neff has shown, fosters greater motivation and emotional resilience than self-criticism. When failure is met with kindness rather than condemnation, individuals are more likely to try again, learn, and grow. This approach counters the cultural tendency to equate self-worth with achievement, offering a healthier path towards self-acceptance and development. Cultural and societal attitudes toward failure vary, but in many modern contexts, failure is still stigmatized. Schools often prioritize grades over learning, inadvertently teaching students to avoid risk and value perfectionism. Workplaces may punish mistakes, harshly, discouraging innovation. Social media amplifies these pressures by presenting curated images of success, making failure seem invisible or unacceptable. Against this backdrop, psychology's reframing of failure as necessary for growth is revolutionary. It invites individuals and institutions to cultivate environments where mistakes are not feared, but valued as part of the learning process. Some schools now emphasize productive failure, encouraging students to grapple with problems and make errors before arriving at solutions. In business, some companies celebrate failure reports as opportunities for organizational learning rather than individual blame. These shifts reflect a growing recognition that creativity and progress flourish when people are unafraid to fail. On a personal level, learning to embrace failure often requires intentional practice. Mindfulness can help by creating a non-judgmental awareness of mistakes, reducing the emotional sting of failure. Journaling about setbacks can transform them into lessons, making patterns and opportunities for growth visible. Seeking feedback from trusted peers or mentors can reframe failure as a shared journey rather than an isolated shortcoming. Above all, persistence, the willingness to keep trying despite discomfort, is the key to transforming failure into growth. This persistence does not mean ignoring limits or blindly repeating mistakes, but approaching challenges with curiosity, flexibility, and openness to change. At its deepest level, the lesson of failure and growth is about meaning. Failure can become destructive when interpreted as meaningless suffering or evidence of inadequacy, but when framed as part of a larger journey of learning, mastery, or self-discovery, failure acquires purpose. Viktor Frankl, in his reflections on meaning and suffering, emphasized that humans can endure almost any how if they have a why. Failure, then, is not an obstacle to meaning, but one of its richest teachers. It forces reflection, demands humility, and calls forth resilience. It reminds us that progress is not linear, and that the story of growth is written in chapters of struggle as well as triumph. Ultimately, the psychological lesson of failure and growth redefines success itself. Success is not the absence of mistakes, but the ability to transform them into stepping stones. It is not measured by unbroken achievement, but by the willingness to try, stumble, and rise again. In this way, failure ceases to be an enemy and becomes a companion, guiding us toward deeper wisdom and greater strength. To embrace failure is to embrace the truth of being human, imperfect, striving, learning, and always capable of becoming more. In this recognition, failure loses its sting and becomes instead the soil from which growth and resilience bloom. The legacy of psychological lessons, particularly those distilled into simple principles for living, is one of quiet transformation rather than sudden revolution. Unlike inventions that can be traced to a single moment, or leaders whose actions alter history overnight, the influence of psychology's teachings has seeped into culture gradually, reshaping education, therapy, workplaces, relationships, and even language itself. The eighth lesson, its legacy in everyday life, speaks to the way insights about the mind and human behavior have moved from academic circles and clinical settings into kitchens, classrooms, offices, and communities. What once required the guidance of philosophers or specialized therapists is now part of how people understand themselves and others in ordinary conversations, decision-making, and self-reflection. The true legacy of psychology is not in creating something entirely new, but in helping people remember truths about being human that were always present, waiting to be noticed. One way this legacy manifests is in the normalization of emotional awareness. In previous generations, Emotions were often treated as private matters, or worse, as signs of weakness. The cultural message was clear: endure, suppress, and carry on. But psychology shifted this narrative, showing that emotions are not obstacles, but vital information about one's internal world. Today, terms like emotional intelligence, self-regulation, and triggers have entered everyday vocabulary. Parents encourage children to use their words rather than lash out. Workplaces provide workshops on managing stress, and couples learn the value of listening to emotions without defensiveness. These shifts reflect the infiltration of psychological wisdom into daily life, changing how people relate to themselves and one another. Another aspect of this legacy lies in the way people approach growth and change. Self-help literature, though sometimes criticized for oversimplification, is a direct descendant of psychological research and philosophy. Concepts like setting realistic goals, practicing gratitude, cultivating resilience, or engaging in mindfulness are drawn from decades of study and thousands of years of human reflection. What makes their legacy remarkable is their accessibility. Someone who never reads an academic paper or attends therapy can still encounter these ideas on a podcast, in a bookshop, or through a social media post. The lesson of psychology has become democratized, offering tools for reflection and healing to millions who might otherwise never have had access. The workplace has also been profoundly reshaped by psychological insights, where once efficiency and output were the sole measures of value. Modern organizations increasingly recognize the role of mental health, motivation, and interpersonal dynamics. The idea that people perform best when they feel valued, supported, and engaged is rooted in psychological research. Leadership programs now emphasize empathy and emotional intelligence as much as strategy. Work-life balance is discussed not as a luxury, but as a necessity for sustained productivity and well-being. These cultural shifts illustrate how psychological lessons, once confined to therapy rooms or academic journals, now inform decisions in boardrooms and policymaking. Education, too, bears the imprint of this legacy, where traditional schooling often emphasized rote memorization and rigid discipline. Modern approaches, influenced by psychology, highlight the importance of curiosity, creativity, and social-emotional learning. Teachers are trained to understand developmental stages, recognize learning differences, and support students not only in academics, but in building resilience and confidence. The lesson that every child has potential, and that mistakes are opportunities rather than failures, has altered classrooms across the globe. Growth mindset interventions, for example, have encouraged millions of students to see challenges as opportunities for improvement, rather than proof of inadequacy. These changes, though subtle in daily life, reflect the profound cultural impact of psychology's insights. At the level of individual lives, the legacy is often most visible in how people respond to adversity. In moments of loss, stress, or conflict, individuals now have access to tools for coping and understanding that were less available to previous generations. Someone facing grief may recall the importance of acknowledging rather than suppressing emotions. Someone navigating anxiety may practice mindful breathing, recognizing it as a validated strategy for calming the nervous system. Couples may turn to principles of active listening or nonviolent communication to resolve disputes. These practices reflect the diffusion of psychology into the fabric of everyday resilience, offering people resources that their ancestors often lacked. The cultural conversation about mental health itself is part of this legacy. What was once stigmatized or hidden is now increasingly spoken about openly. Celebrities, athletes, and leaders share their struggles with anxiety, depression, or burnout, reducing shame and encouraging others to seek help. Campaigns emphasize that mental health is as important as physical health, and therapy has become more normalized across diverse populations. This shift reflects a deep societal change, the recognition that the mind deserves care, and that tending to it benefits not only individuals but communities. The legacy here is one of compassion, breaking cycles of silence and opening doors to healing. Of course, this legacy is not without challenges and criticisms. The spread of psychological ideas into popular culture sometimes results in oversimplification or misinterpretation. Terms like toxic, trauma, or narcissist are often used casually, stripped of their clinical meaning. Self-help can become commodified, offering quick fixes rather than encouraging deep engagement. Yet even these pitfalls point to the power of psychology's lessons. They are so influential that they have become part of the common tongue, debated and reshaped in the public sphere. The task moving forward is to balance accessibility with integrity, ensuring that the depth of psychological wisdom is not lost in translation. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of psychological lessons is their reminder of shared humanity. At their core, these teachings emphasize that everyone struggles, everyone learns, and everyone grows. They highlight the universality of emotions, the importance of connection, and the possibility of transformation. They encourage humility by reminding us that the mind is complex and that no one has all the answers. They foster hope by showing that change is possible, even in the face of suffering. And they inspire compassion, urging us to see others not only as they appear, but as complex beings shaped by invisible struggles and untold stories. In the end, the legacy of psychology is not found in a single monument, invention, or individual. It lives in the way people talk to their children, care for their partners, collaborate with colleagues, or soothe themselves after a difficult day. It is present in the teacher who encourages a struggling student, the manager who listens with empathy, the parent who apologizes after losing patience, and the individual who pauses to breathe before reacting. These small acts, repeated across millions of lives, reflect the quiet revolution that psychology has brought into being. The legacy is not that psychology changed life in grand visible strokes, but that it helped countless individuals change how they live, moment by moment, choice by choice. In that sense, the final lesson is that wisdom does not die, but becomes absorbed into the rhythm of ordinary existence, leaving a mark not in history books alone, but in the texture of daily life itself.